Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Art of Performance podcast, episode 42. And today we're going to be diving deep into progressive overload, super compensation in training, and some examples of resistance training and progressive overload methods. But before we do, I hope each and every one of you is having a fantastic week wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever you are up to. Let's start with a brief recap from our previous episode. And we took a big deep dive into general adaptation syndrome. We went through some of the understanding about how we can manipulate stress, how we can utilize the traffic light system to better advantage us when it comes to our training and when it comes to our overall performance. And today is no different. I'm here trying to give you guys as much value as possible and try and help you understand some of the elements around progressive overload, because it is a little bit grey, to say the least, with some individuals when they go into training. They think there is only but one way that we can progressively overload. But rest assured, there is more than one way that we can progressively overload. And today, I want to show you exactly what that looks like so you have a good understanding across the board when it comes to training. Before we get started, we need to understand what the fuck is progressive overload? What is it? Where do people go down this line? What does it really matter? The definition doesn't matter, but what does matter is you understand how this can be applied later on down the line. Progressive overload is the concept of you gradually increasing the stress that you place upon your body during exercise or training. That's all it means. And we have lots of different ways, guess what? That we can gradually increase the stress upon the body. It doesn't just have to be weight, ladies and gentlemen. There are many ways in which we can do this. But why is this important? It's important because our bodies only adapt to the stress that we can place it under and the stress that we can recover from. If we go back to that general adaptation syndrome chat that we did before, if we place our bodies under too much stress and we're constantly hitting red days, and red days, if you haven't listened to the previous podcast, I'd highly recommend you go and watch that one. Those red days are only going to accumulate more and more stress and fatigue on the body. What we need to be able to do is pull that right back and understand that if we give our bodies too much stress to deal with and handle, guess what? We're going to break. And things aren't going to go the way that you would hope to in terms of you progressing necessarily with your training. So it's really important that the stress we place under our bodies is a stress that we can recover from and one that we can then adapt to as our time goes on. We want to just push the needle and challenge the body enough each and every single time. It really is important, progressive overload, because if you constantly stayed at the same weight day in, day out, or the same intensity, or the same rest periods, or the same tempos, the same selection of exercises and execution pieces, year after year after year after year after year, your body's going to adapt to this stimulus that you're placing under. Therefore, we're more likely to reach plateaus. So if you're sat there on this podcast now thinking, I'm not progressing, maybe it's because you are not adapting to the stress your body's being placed under. Therefore, that plateau has been hit and continuous improvement is just a distant journey and a distant memory that you're probably not going to see anytime soon unless you modify and unless you change some of the aspects that we're going to be talking about today. So let's take a dive into examples of progressive overload. First and most importantly, or the most common one, should we say, that so many people know is modifying the weight or the load that's on the bar or the dumbbell or the cable, etc., etc., etc. Adding more weights and just loading as much as they can week on week on week in order to try and adapt to the stress that we're placing on our body. Modifying the weight is one example of this. By week 1, we've started on a 50 kilogram bench press. Week 2, we might increase that weight to 52, 53, 54, or even 55. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you can use the small little biscuit discs in order to progressively overload. You don't have to load the bar with another 10 kilos or another 5 kilos every single time. These small little discs were designed to help you with that as you get further along in your journey. So something to consider if you're in this for the long run, of course. So adding weight, 50 kilos week 1, 55 kilos in the bench press week 2, 57 kilos in the bench press week 3, 60 kilos in week 4. This is one simple example of us increasing weight, and this is why it's important to log and track, because then we can see where we were the week before as we progress. Remember, this is all about performance. The second way is a modification in repetitions, and we can increase our reps week on week, utilizing, and let's go back to that bench press example, 50 kilos week 1, 55 week 2, 57 week 3, and 60 week 4. Well, if in week 1, I did 50 kilos and I did 3 sets of 10 repetitions. In week 2, rather than just increasing the weight and going to 52 kilos, I could stay at 50 and increase the amount of volume of work I'm doing by going, okay, I'm going to do 4 sets of 10 repetitions this week. And then maybe in week 5, I'm going to do 5 sets of 8 repetitions. And then maybe as I get to week 4 or week 4, 5, and 6, I'm going to increase my rep scheme up to maybe 6 sets of 6 repetitions. It's a gradual increase in rep ranges that you can use, and alongside some modification in weight as a way to overload the system so that our body can adapt to this stress and we can build on this stress. Like you've just heard me say there in the rep scheme, we can also modify the sets. So week 1, let's go back through this process. 3 sets of 10. Week 2, 4 sets of 8. Week 3 could be 5 sets of 6 to 7. Week 4 could be 6 sets of 6 to 8. The rep schemes have increased, but then also so have the set schemes. And we can also chuck in some other advanced techniques around this, like pyramid sets and drop sets and cluster sets on these things as well. One thing a lot of people generally don't tend to follow when it comes to progressive overload is modifying your rest periods. You don't have to stick to 60 seconds to 90 seconds every single time you walk into the gym. Shorter rest can increase the intensity, but equally longer rest, if you are hitting some of those heavier sets, is going to allow you to hit that set with maybe a little bit more intensity and or a bit more quality, which of course is important when it comes to making sure we're getting the efficiency through the muscular system and we're actually driving the stimulus to where we want it to drive. There's no point in me taking 60 seconds when I'm about to go and do a 150 kilo squat, take 60 seconds rest, and then absolutely blow out my fart pipe when I then go and do the next bloody set. It's important we understand the differences here. One more thing. Well, not one more thing. We're going to run through a few more here. But option number 5. So we've done modify weight, modify reps. We've played around with how we can modify sets as our third option. We've spoken about increasing our rest periods or decreasing rest periods length. That can be a modification for 4. And then number 5 is modifying the tempo. Tempo can be a really great way that we can place more stress on the system. We can play around with slow eccentrics, and this is the negative portion of the rep. An example of this would be if you took the barbell in a bench press, let's use that as the example, out of the rack and the arms were at the lengthened, fully extended position. That negative portion where the barbell's coming down towards the chest is what we call the eccentric part of a rep. And we can challenge this by going for a 3-1-1-1 tempo. That simply means a 3-second negative, a 1-second pause at the chest, a 1-second concentric or positive action, followed by a 1-second pause at the top. Now, this is a really good way that you can play around with modifying the progressive overload paradigm. We can look at even increasing that tempo up to 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds in some cases if you really want it. And if you really wanted to dive deep into it, you could go 10 to 15-second negative in a squat for all I know, and for all you might care. So if that's something that you're looking at, it's another way that we can change the stress dynamic that's happening in the body. Our sixth one, we can look at exercise execution and exercise selection. Now, a lot of people where we go, let's use, and I'm going to give you an example here. Let's use the leg press. I'm not going to say a lot of people because it's a generalist term, but let's talk about the leg press. In a leg press, we can bias our pattern or bias our movement, should we say, to target different musculature structures inside the legs. We can bias it so that we can place our foot positioning a little bit lower or higher to target the quads. We can also cue that from a neuro perspective. We can also think a little bit more in our mind about, right, press my toes in, really think about the quadriceps. This can also help target different muscles in the system to create a different stimulus. The same can be said as if we're in the barbell bench press. If we're looking at force levers, if we're looking at angles, we're going to torque and that stuff that we can explore later. When we take that barbell bench press, if we take a closer grip, we're probably going to find that we're biasing a little bit more of the tricep. If we take a wider grip, we might find that we bias a little bit more of the pec. But this is so individual and context dependent, depending on you. I can't turn around and say have a wider grip to bias pec because that might not be the case for you. It's really important that every single individual is very different. Their limb lengths are different. Their angles are different that they can create. The available ranges and positions that you can get through all differ. So when it comes to modifying exercises and modifying the execution of exercises, this is all done on an analytical basis, especially with the guys that I look after, the athletes that I look after, all of the men and women I coach. We look at movement and we analyze it and we see how we can actually change and taper the movement and tailor the movement to target what we want to target. Number 7 could be what we call frequency. Frequency of sessions per week. By increasing, and let's say, for example, you have a particular stubborn area. Let's say the legs is something that you want to grow. The legs is something that you want to increase the density of your quads and your glutes and everything. By modifying the sessions that you do per week, we might do a lower session on a Monday that is glute and quad bias, for example, or glute and hamstring bias as an example. And then again on the Thursday, Friday, we might go back in and do another lower body session that's hinge dominant, but then also biases the glutes and the quads and the hamstrings. By increasing the amount of frequency that the muscles are worked each week, this is another variation of us progressively overloading the body and the system, placing it under more stress controllably, and then allowing the body to recover and adapt from that. And then that very subtle touch point that I mentioned earlier, there are loads of other advanced techniques that we can talk about. Cluster sets, drop sets, even pyramid sets. There are so many examples of playing around with progressive overload, but I love the term KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Go through this progressive overload paradigm first and go through these foundational stages before we even consider things like cluster sets, where we might take one set of 6 reps and go two reps, rest, 2 reps, rest, 2 reps. The rest period might be 10, 15 seconds, but that's one example. A pyramid set could work from 10 reps to 8 to 7 to 6 to 5 to, or 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and equally could be the reverse of that. But what we don't want to do, and a drop set an example, we could go in and do a 100 kilogram bench press for 10 reps, rip some weight off for that 100 kilo, and then add maybe 50 kilo to it and have it as a drop set that way. There are so many advanced ways that we can do this and play with. It's not just about increasing the weight. This is really, really bloody important. It's not just about adding more load to the bar week on week every single time that you're walking into the gym, because this is only going to result in one thing. It's going to result in plateaus. It's going to result in performance deficits. It's going to result in you not being able to progress with your strength, your training, your lifts, and the same can actually be applied when we look at cardiovascular development or work capacity or energy system development. If you did the same 6x400 meter sprints every bloody week, nothing's going to change. The stimulus is always going to be the same. The body will naturally adapt to the stress that's being placed on you, providing that we are recovering and we're able to recover from that stress. So this is really important that we understand that the concepts of progressive overload isn't just exclusive to one simple thing. It's not just exclusive to, and I quote, only doing increases in weight, because that's not necessarily where things change. This is just one aspect of progressive overload. So let's take a little bit of a segue into super compensation. And this is what happens after we've applied progressive overload to the body. And the response that our body goes through is super compensation. So it's what happens in this post-training window. And it's during which you've trained a certain function, you've trained a certain parameter, whatever that looks like, etc. And it has a higher performance capacity than what you did before in your previous session. This basically means the stuff that you've done in the previous session, this session that you're coming to currently is a little bit more difficult. Yeah, it's a little bit more difficult. And what this means is that whatever we did prior to our training session is allowing us to supercompensate and make a better change, whatever that might be, whether it be leg strength, whether it be squatting power, whether it be bench pressing exercises, deadlift, whether it be clean and jerks, whether it be shoulder press. It doesn't matter what exercise it is. But it's the post-training period during where the train function or parameter has a higher performance capacity than what it did before. And that's the key that we've got to understand. We've got to understand the training stimulus. So we'll talk about the initial workout or the initial piece of stress. If the stress is too high in a session and our body can't fully recover and return back to that repair line, back to that baseline, therefore we probably won't be able to compensate. We're probably not going to be able to see change because our body's too stressed. And if we go back to the example of just increasing weight every single week upon week upon week upon week, well, eventually our body's not going to go through this super compensation phase. It's going to consistently be in its fatigued, plateaued state because we're never changing unless we consistently do and not even unless we play around with some of the variables of progressive overload, we're always going to be stuck at this phase. And it's really important that when we talk about the training stimulus and the stress that we're placing on our body, it has to be one that the body can repair and recover from, not one that's going to cook us and kill us off. And when we talk about supercompensation, it's another way of the body overcompensating to be better prepared for it when it comes to that next session. So let's say we did Monday's lower body session and we just hit it perfectly right. Something called a specific adaptation to an imposed demand. That just means we really applied the perfect stimulus to get the demand that we needed from your body. And if we do that on a Monday and we go back into the session and do that on a Friday, and the body has overcompensated and it has recovered and it has repaired down to baseline, it means it's going to be better prepared to hit that session on the Friday, as an example. The adaptation is you over time improving where that baseline is. And our baseline performance then begins to improve each and every time. So when we talk about supercompensation, it's important we understand the training stimulus that we're putting our bodies under when we talk about the stress of that workout. It's important that we understand what we're doing from a recovery perspective, making sure our body can repair and return to baseline. The supercompensation effect that has, where the body overcompensates to be better prepared for the next session. And then the fourth thing is making sure that the adaptation that we're placing on our body is allowing us to increase our baseline of performance every single time. And this happens on a microscopic level. And this is where longevity and consistency over time is really important. It's not just about you going in, smashing yourself and thrashing yourself for 6 weeks and then thinking you're going to make a monumental change. This happens over years and years and years of training. So it's really important that we understand this. So let's just recap. Remember, there is more to progressive overload than just increasing training. We can talk about modifications in reps, in sets, in tempo, in rest, in exercise execution, in exercise selection. We can talk about frequency. We can talk about utilizing cluster sets, drop sets, mechanical drop sets, loads of different variations in which we can play around with progressive overload. Then let's just remember we've spoken and discussed there about super compensation and how that's applied to the system and what that really means when we're trying to change and improve our performance above all else. But I'm encouraging you, all of you listeners to the Art of Performance podcast, apply some of these principles. They're really important and they're going to be really, really helpful when it comes to you, when it comes to you making a change in your performance, making a change in your strength, making a change in overall health and wellness. Progressive overload is a massive part of this puzzle, and understanding supercompensation helps you piece all of this together. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to round out the Art of Performance podcast there. Thank you so much for joining us on episode 42. As always, I'd massively appreciate each and every one of you dropping into our podcast or into Spotify channels, wherever it is you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube perhaps. Leave us a review. Let us know your thoughts. If this has been helpful, please do let us know. And of course, if you can help us and support the channel, help me and support this channel grow, by all means, we'd love if you could share this across any of your social media handles as well. It massively helps us out and it makes the Art of Performance podcast reach more listeners, more viewers, and hopefully build out a better, healthier, happier version of people that want to take health and fitness to a whole new level. I've been your host, Dean Hammond, and I look forward to speaking to you all, seeing you all, and catching up with you all on our next episode, episode 43. Stay tuned, and I will catch up with you soon.